very natural, in my experience at least, to feel like the dumbest person in the room when immediately after acquisition, because everyone has the experience of the previous years, and you're coming in completely fresh.
All right, Ron Diamant, thank you so much for joining me on 20-Minute Leaders.
Gladly, I'm happy to be here.
All right, I cannot wait to learn over these next 20 minutes or so about leadership and tech, about what it's like being a very, very, very early employee, like you were at Annapurna, and your incredible experience as being a tech lead at various very well-known companies. I think most recently AWS, right, within Amazon. So let's dive in. Ron, tell me a little bit about who you are. Take me all the way back to your time at the Technion. You're doing your bachelor's and master's, and let's go from there.
All right, cool. So yeah, I was in academic reserve. I did my bachelor's in electrical engineering in the Technion. After that, I went to the military, worked as an engineer for a couple of years. During that time, I did my master's as well. I actually studied a lot in my military service. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I know that many academic reserve don't like that time so much, but I enjoyed it. After that, after the military service, I went to work for an Israeli company called Zoran, a semiconductor company, where I was doing mostly math stuff. So kind of an intersection of mathematics and engineering. So error correction code, security applications, and all things that are kind of math related. After a while, Zoran got acquired by CSR, a British company. And with that, I found myself moving to a startup that was in the very early days. If I recall correctly, I was employee number 7 there.
Wow.
Startup is called Annapurna Labs. After about 4 years, Annapurna got acquired by AWS, which was interesting, especially with my previous acquisition experience, which wasn't that positive. But that acquisition with AWS was actually quite amazing. AWS is a great technology playground, and we can talk about that a little bit. Since then, I'm in AWS. I actually got the chance to initiate a product for AWS, machine learning related, and maybe we can talk about it later as well.
Incredible. Did they disclose the deal of the acquisition for Annapurna?
There's enough information online, yeah.
Enough information online, so I'm gonna have to attach it afterwards in the top. But I have to ask. What is it like being a very early employee at a place like Annapurna? And what I mean, that's a very different experience from being a founder of the company. You've essentially been in the same room as them practically from the very, very, very first days, yet you had very different experiences. So talk to me a little bit about what's it like being a very early employee.
Yes. First of all, I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're joining a founding team that is experienced and know what they're doing. It's a great experience. So I would say it's scary at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's scary because you typically reduce your salary a little bit. You join a team that you don't know how things will play out with. You don't have a defined role. You do whatever is needed.
Right.
But it's a blast. I mean, you instead of being very focused in one of the big companies, like I won't mention other companies' names actually, but instead of being very focused on your day job, you get to do whatever task is needed at the time. And if you're willing to go out of your comfort zone, you go out of your comfort zone all the time. So I was hired to do one thing. I think I did everything else in the company other than the thing I was hired to do. I learned a lot during these years. I learned a lot from the founders who were, these guys were experienced. They were VPs in Marvell prior to founding Annapurna Labs. All in all, I think it was a blast. And one thing that I keep telling other folks is that what's different between a startup and a big company is that when you're in a startup, everyone wants for everyone else to succeed, because you succeed and fail together. And in a big company, that's not exactly the vibe that you're getting, and the entire day-to-day becomes completely different once you work as a team and try to succeed together.
Incredible. So how long did you spend at Annapurna as employee number 7?
So Annapurna grew very quickly. I spent 4 years in Annapurna from joining until we got acquired. But Annapurna grew from 7 to about 25 in a matter of 6 months.
Wow.
And from there, in the next 2 to 3 years, we grew to 120. And today we're way more than that, but I cannot disclose the number because it's internal data.
Wow, incredible. Okay, and so at the end, you're saying on one hand you join an early stage startup. It's a lot. It's a lot of fun. You're a part of the team. It's not really defined. It's not structured. So it's like a big playground, and you get to be a part of hopefully a very nice success story like the acquisition to AWS. But the alternative, the drawback is that it's more risky. You usually take a pay cut for that potential milestone later on, right?
Absolutely, but what I would recommend for junior engineers is to not think about the short-term salary or compensation. Think about the long-term, just the amount that you will learn in a small company as a startup is way higher than what you will learn in a big company.
Right, definitely. But then, I mean, you can't just go and it almost seems irresponsible to just go and join any early stage startup because it seems exciting. I mean, then you do want some stability, and a lot of early stage startups today, I mean, they don't automatically offer you compensation. So, what are your tips on sort of balancing the two ideas, and what type of due diligence can you do on an early stage company before joining?
So I don't know if I have a very well thought set of tips, but I can tell about my story.
I want to know your experience.
Yeah. So what I did is I started when Zoran got acquired. I figured that this is not going in the right direction, and that's one recommendation that I can give. Don't look only at your day to day. Think about where the company is going long term.
Right.
Once I saw that this is not going in the right direction, I started looking, and I was pretty young. I wanted to experience a startup. So one of the things that I started doing is to look at startups that are out there today. And I was just looking at the newspaper, asking folks around. When I all of a sudden heard about Annapurna. What excited me there is, first of all, they were in very early days. I think they were in the 1 month after being founded.
Wow.
The second thing that I noted immediately is that the founders were folks with a significant experience and very well-established record.
Right.
That was a good sign for me. And the third thing that I noticed is that
Bond?
The chairman of the board, the person that gave them the seed money, was a well-known person in the semiconductor industry.
Okay.
Victor Villens, and he has a record of founding companies that eventually become successful.
Wonderful.
So these were good signs for me. I also went and talked with my dad. My dad worked in the field, and he knew all these folks and said, "Thumbs up from me. I know these guys. These guys know what they're doing. Go for it." And
I love it. Okay, at the end, that's the most important advice. Talk to dad. They know. they have the best advice in the end, is from experience. But Ron, then you transition to AWS. So now you're a part of a much larger organization, and it's no longer, you're no longer just employee number 7. But and while you may be leading your own product within AWS, I mean, you're still part of a new culture. You have to adapt and assimilate into a whole new, type of company. So how is that progression like, and what are some of the challenges that go with it?
So first of all, immediately after acquisition, you have a big shock because all of a sudden there's all this terminology and culture that you're not familiar with,
right?
And you're starting to study quite a lot and basically coming up to speed very quickly. It's very natural in my experience at least to feel like the dumbest person in the room when immediately after acquisition, because everyone has the experience of the previous years and you're coming in completely fresh. What I would recommend is, first of all, learn as quickly and as much as you can. But on the other hand, don't take things without applying some judgment. So there were things that I liked about the AWS culture. There were things that I didn't like about the AWS culture. And I think it was the correct thing for me, at least, to integrate with the stuff that I would connect with and not blindly go with everything that I saw. And be patient. At the end of the day, you need to know the people, you need to know the technology, you need to know the history, and then you can contribute.
Totally. Okay, so let's move on to this idea of team execution, lean execution, and what makes or breaks a good team. And not just about whether people like each other or whether they have a good time in the office, but also about actually executing products because you've seen the good and the bad. So talk to me a little bit about what are some of the key takeaways of a good engineering team.
So I think a lot of it is about ownership. So what I see in different teams is when people own things from beginning to end, things tend to converge much more smoothly. So what I see in many teams that are not delivering very quickly is that everyone has their role and they're doing what they're asked to do, and that's it. They stop they stop their responsibility there. They don't continue to check with the next person in line whether they got everything that they needed, whether it's working for them, and so on. One thing that I like to do is, first of all, make sure that people that are working on a product own this product from A to Z, even things that they don't do themselves. And it takes some iterating with people to get into that mentality. But when people do it, first of all, it's way more fun because you don't just execute on tasks. You basically own the entire product. You feel like the product is yours. That's a big advantage. The other thing that you see is that there are way less miscommunication because when people are not just building a product to a certain specification, but rather actually speaking with their customer, whether it's local in the team or another team, and understanding their needs, understanding whether the product that they receive actually meets their goals and so on. And that makes a huge difference. So that I would say that's my number one. My number two, and that's probably debatable, but I don't believe in overly documenting. I think projects move fast. You don't know everything in the beginning of the project. If you try to document every decision that you are going to make, and then you try to execute to that specification, by the time you start executing, the entire specification became irrelevant because the industry is moving forward.
So that's about the lean part of it, right?
Exactly. So I strongly believe in doing 50% of the specification work, working based on gut feel and understanding of the overall direction, but starting to execute while keeping on iterating and closing the rest.
But is that feasible within a large organization like AWS when you inevitably you have these best practices and conventions in place because you have to align, thousands of engineers?
It's feasible, but you need to be clever about it. So I think you don't always say, hey, listen, I have 50% of the product specified, go execute. That doesn't work. But you say, okay, I have a specification, here's a specification, and you make sure that the team starts to execute with the portion of the specification that you actually have high confidence in. And you also do communicate that there are some unknowns that you are still working on, but as long as you close the unknowns before they get to executing it, I think that's it's good.
Definitely. So how many different teams and products would you say that you've worked on over the years?
That's a good question. I would say roughly 6 or 7 chips that I worked on.
Wow.
And they all are very similar and very different from each other. So it's an interesting thing to ponder on.
I'm sure. And then, so what's the role of the leader of an organization, a small organization that needs to execute on a product? So fine. So you have, the engineers are they're working, they're lean, they're documenting, not documenting. But what's the role of the team lead or the technical leader of such a product?
So I think, first of all, the technical leader or the team leader, if everyone sees them as a leader, they already made a mistake. They need to drive a culture where decisions are made in a distributed manner.
Okay.
If every single decision gets escalated up, the team doesn't scale. You already made a mistake. The second thing in my mind is to drive the culture of the team. First of all, collaboration. Second, being very focused on execution. So one thing that happens in many engineering organizations is endless debates on the best way to do things. I think you need to drive a culture in the team where you spend your time on what actually matters. And if there are a couple of decisions that will move the needle by 1%, just make a decision, move on, even if it's the wrong decision, no big deal. The third thing I would say is constant prioritization and communication across the team. So a project is complex. You don't know exactly what you're getting into at the beginning of the project. So there's no way you can prioritize all the tasks for the next year and a half. And I'm talking cheap products that take a year and a half to execute. You cannot prioritize the entire thing at day one. So you need to constantly go in and prioritize, especially because as the project nears an end, you're going to give up on some features. So it's better that these will be the less important features. And
Interesting.
it's endless, right? Communication across the team, I think, is also key. Making sure that people actually understand so that they make the right decision in their everyday, their day to day. So I spend, I guess, 30% of my time just explaining things to every single engineer that is willing to listen, because I think eventually it's worth it. People make better decisions based on that.
So this idea of foregoing some features and leaving and deferring the least important ones to the end, this prioritization, I mean, at the end, that's one of the hardest things I think to do, especially as a team leader, right? You have the product, you have the product specifications, but you have all these conflicting notions of what's important, what's critical, what's not critical, and a lot of that is also, not just about the product requirement, but it's about the actual implementation of the product and whether you want to go the extra mile, implement it better, or do you want to release it, a few sprints ahead of time.
Yes, so I think the more I feel with time that the more educated I am and the more time I spend into looking into every point of the project, the easier it is for me to prioritize. So at the beginning, I would almost feel like I'm improvising, and it's really tough to make the decision. But if I look in retrospective, it's because I wasn't educated enough. I didn't see all the different disciplines and how things come together. As time passes and I gain more experience, I can see that the more that you know, the easier it is to do it, and the more comfortable you feel not taking every decision yourself, but rather consulting with the entire team to make the decision.
Definitely. Okay, Ron, I have to know what excites you most. So you've done all sorts of things. You've worked at a variety of places, but what really gets you excited about being an engineer and leading teams?
It's interesting. I think the challenge is definitely a big one for me. Just starting a new technology, especially new technologies which I know nothing about, just getting into this technology space, learning it, and then becoming an expert and eventually executing and building something that customers like and use. Definitely the human part of it, so interacting with smart people, finding a way to deliver together as a team, going through some hardships during the project and finding clever ways around it, whether it's technical or human related. So people get frustrated, people get tired during a long execution, and we find clever ways together. And one thing that I enjoy the most is being super open with the team about it, and just telling them my considerations and trying to make the decision together. For me, if we get to a point in the project where we feel that we reached a problem and we don't know what to do, and if I can come into a conversation and just ask questions and the team decides on the best path forward, that's a lot of fun.
Fascinating. Okay, Ron, one or two pieces of advice you would give to any engineer that is starting their journey, whether it's an early stage startup or a late stage startup, but let's say somebody fresh out of college, they just got their bachelor's or master's in computer science, they're joining a new company. What should they keep in mind, most importantly?
So I think one I would say is focus on building your core capabilities. So too many people I see are trying to kind of race through the career ladder, become a manager, and then get a certain level or something like that. I don't think this is the most important thing in the long term. In the long term, actually, if you build capabilities, you build knowledge across disciplines. I think that's worth much more, and you start to accelerate very quickly later on. That's one. A second one is the world became multidisciplinary. You don't becoming an expert in one narrow topic is not enough anymore. So try to gain experience with a couple of different disciplines. Whether it's software or hardware, it could be even broader than that. A third one is, and it's related, but think long term, don't think short term. And the fourth one is be nice to people, make me people like you. Eventually, it will
The
pay
most
off.
important, probably.
Yeah.
And going off of that, Ron, 20 minutes are up, but I need to know three words that best describe you.
All right. Let's see if I can get this one
It's
quickly.
the most important question, the hardest one.
All right. So I think first of all, I'm adaptable. Things are thrown my way. I'll find a way around them, whether personally or as a team when we build things. Second one, I would say nice and kind to people. We
Yeah.
work together. I'm not trying to compete with
I don't hear
everyone.
that often. It's so important though. I mean, it's such a basic thing. No matter what you do in life, no matter the level you are and the experience you've had, just being kind and being nice, being humane.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I couldn't agree more. And third one, I don't know. I find it's kind of like adaptable, but I find a path forward always. I'm very optimistic. I know that there will be a way to succeed.
I love it. Sounds like the really important traits of an engineer. Ron, thank you very much. Thank you for everything, for all the inspiration, for all the knowledge. I think this is hugely relevant to my path, hugely relevant to a lot of the people that are following this show, and they're also young engineers on their path and on their journey. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.